Well, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. My name is Ken Balbuena and I am the Director of Communications and Outreach at the Shrine. I'll be serving as your co-host and moderator for today's webinar, along with my colleague, Brandon Brown. Thank you for joining us on this first day of June. Today we're featuring two guests, Paul Menhart, pitching coach of the Washington Nationals, World Series champions, and Ray McKenna, founder and president of Catholic Athletes for Christ. Now, Paul Menhart is the pitching coach of the World Series champion Washington Nationals. Prior to being promoted to the role 30 games into the 2019 season, Paul had served in a variety of positions with the Washington Nationals organization over the last 15 years, including 4 years as the minor league pitching coordinator. By the Toronto Blue Jays in the 8th round of the 1990 draft out of Western Carolina University, and he played 3 seasons at the major league level. Paul and his wife Bitsy live in Savannah, Georgia, and have 3 children. Ray McKenna is a Washington, D.C. based attorney who lives with his wife Sean, their 7 children, and 2 German Shepherds in Alexandria, Virginia. A lifelong baseball fan, Ray is founder and president of Catholic Athletes for Christ, a sports ministry that serves professional and collegiate athletes, including all Major League Baseball teams. Over his 30-year legal career that spans both the government and the private sector, he has served as general counsel of the General Services Administration from 2001 to 2004, legal counsel for the Chief Administrative Officer of the United States House of Representatives from 1995 to 2001, and as an attorney advisor at the U.S. Department of Justice in the 1980s. He is a member of the Vatican Sports at the Service of Humanity Committee and has been involved with sports ministry for over 30 years, including volunteer service with Baseball Chapel, the Midtown Youth and Boxing Academy, and Athletes and Business Leaders for Kids. Now, we will also have a Q&A period. Towards the end of this webinar, so be sure to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask as many questions as possible, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. No guarantees we will, but we will try to. So let's go ahead and get started. Paul and Ray, welcome to this webinar.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have both of you here. Both get into some of the questions here right at the beginning. Now, being able to go to Mass as a sports professional must be difficult since you were kind of constantly on the road. In fact, looks like that the Nats were on the road 88. They were at home 88 games, but actually on the road for 90 games, so even more on the road. Now, as a professional athlete and a professional coach here, can you please tell our audience what it's like being an active Catholic when you are on the road so much?
I'll tell you what, it's been quite a blessing to have people like Ray involved in Major League Baseball. The convenience that he offers us to attend Mass every Sunday morning, I don't think that people can truly understand how important that is for us to fulfill that obligation and have it so convenient, especially when we're not only in DC, but when we're out and about at other parks. So the convenience aspect of it is something that I can't thank him and those that around him enough for doing that and setting all that up. It's freezing.
Excellent. Well, Ray, is it the same thing similar for professional athletes in other sports areas?
It is, Brandon. Baseball is probably the most challenging because of the length of the season, 162 games plus the postseason. And also because the games are played over the course of a weekend when, for Catholics, our Mass obligation would be on a Saturday or a Sunday. The NFL is a close second because while they have fewer games, they play those games over weekends. And the other sports, not as challenging per se, because usually they have a break over the Saturday, Sunday period where they might be able to go to Mass. And for individual Olympic sports, swimming, for example, during the course of a swimming meet, it's probably impossible for an athlete to get away if the sacraments aren't brought to their sporting venue.
Great. And Paul, could you please talk about how it felt to win the World Series and the process and the games leading up to it?
If you had an hour, maybe more, I could tell you the process was quite intense, to say the least. But to be in that dugout and to celebrate with my family at the very end, there really aren't too many words that could quite describe all the hard work and all the people that I could thank leading up to that very, very special moment. There were so many behind the scenes individuals that helped make my job easier and ultimately give the guys that were doing all the hard work the chance to go ahead and perform and win the ultimate crown. And then to be able to celebrate afterwards, go into a Capitals game, the parade, going to visit the president and the first lady, the White House, it almost seems like a dream. But to be able to share that with my family was extremely special. It's muted.
Sorry about that. What's it like being around a crowd, just chanting and cheering like that? I imagine it's like nothing that many people have never experienced before.
I got to experience it as a player first, and making my major league debut back in 1995. It's actually easier to pitch or perform or be around a crowd of that size because it's just kind of like a constant buzz. It's those smaller stadiums where you don't have them all filled out and you hear that one or two individuals that are making all that loud, obnoxious noises, and you can really hear that a lot more clear than you can a 50,000 or 44,000 people. It just sounds like a buzz, and it's quite enjoyable actually, because you put it out of your mind, and it's very pleasing.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, I did read somewhere that you once had Tommy John surgery during your playing career, and Tommy John surgery obviously is very, very major surgery. And now Steven Strasburg, who had the same surgery a couple of years ago, and he again became the MVP of the World Series. Would you say that your experience really helped to connect with him and help him to become a better pitcher?
I think experience in general helps with not only Steven. Having Tommy John surgery myself definitely helped develop a relationship with Steven, because we had him in the minor leagues. So I was actually part of his rehabilitation, his throwing program, return to throwing, all of that, along with our training staff and our strength core. So prior relationship that we had going into the season, there was already mutual respect for each other, because not only had we both gone through the surgery, but I was also there to help him get back to playing shape. So experience in general definitely aids in developing most of the relationships that you have to build to be a successful coach or a successful team.
Great. Paul, next question is, what kind of spiritual community is there among some of the players and coaches? And do you all often get to go to mass together and discuss matters of faith?
There's a handful of individuals, starting with Mike Rizzo. I'm not sure if they want me to mention their names or not. They should be very proud to be Catholics, that's for sure. But there's a nice core group of individuals that attend mass, that are on the team, that get involved in doing readings during this time. And as I spoke about the experience and building of relationships, those commonalities that we have, we can not only share a mass together, but we can also talk about it, as an aside, and how we can help and others, and the things that some of these guys that have a lot more resources than I do, they get involved in the community a little bit more and supporting with their charity work. It's quite amazing that we have that common ground to where we can help others. And I wish I could have or could do more. By no means perfect, that's for sure. But some of these guys do have the resources, and they are more than willing to give. And that's probably why we were so successful as a team because of that giving nature that these players exuded every day. They're just such a wonderful group of individuals.
If I can go off script a little bit, what are the logistics really kind of attending mass, like even at either Nationals Park or at a different stadium? I mean, I know at work, we get to go to the shrine. We go upstairs. But where do you go and celebrate mass?
Go ahead, Ray. You can take that one. Take yourself off mute.
And at the Nats Park, we celebrated in the press conference room where Davey Martinez holds his pre and post game press conferences. And in other stadiums, it varies. And Paul probably knows better than I because he's traveling to a lot more stadiums than I normally do. But I think typically it would be in a press conference, or we try to do it in a room as close to the locker rooms as possible, make it as convenient as possible for the players. Sometimes there's not a room of a sufficient size available, but it usually will be a space somewhere in close proximity to the locker room in the stadiums.
Nice.
There's actually in Chicago with the Cubs and at Wrigley, we did it in the kitchen, which was kind of fun. We sat around a round table and had a wonderful mass. And other places are like Ray said, they take place in the press conference room, which is convenient because it's already set up chair wise. They don't have pews or anything, but it's pretty similar to what you're looking for and having a podium and things of that nature.
And if I may add to Paul's comment before they did it in the kitchen in Chicago, they used to do it in left field. It used to have quite a following, traipsing up to it was the third deck in the left field for mass. So.
Very nice. All right. Well, I do want to shift gears just a tad bit, and let's talk a little bit about St. John Paul II. He's one of my dear friends here. Obviously, since I work at the Shrine. Now, St. John Paul II was very much known for his love of sports, and while I've not been able to confirm that he attended a Major League Baseball game, he did celebrate Mass quite a bit. He actually was celebrated Mass in 5 different baseball stadiums during 3 different visits to the United States, and he also participated in a World Youth Day activities in a 6th ballpark during a 4th visit. Now, on screen here, we do see a quote from St. John Paul II in his April 3rd, 1986 address to the participants in the General Assembly of the International Catholic Federation for Sports and Physical Education, where he speaks about the importance of professional athletes being role models for the fans. Now, this seems to be very much in line with the spirit of Catholic Athletes for Christ, right?
It is. In fact, John Paul II, if you would, is very much an inspiration to the founding of Catholic Athletes for Christ. We founded the organization in close collaboration with the establishment by St. John Paul II of the Vatican Office of Sport in 2005, I believe it was founded. And we really try to model the work of John Paul II, the vision of John Paul II, which is simply, as I understand it, to view sports like any other aspect of life, where we should have Christ at the center and we should evangelize. We should use all the talents we're given, but if you're a great pitching coach like Paul is, for example, or one of his fantastic pitchers, you use those talents to, in some way, model Christ. And I know that he mentioned role model, and that's a huge issue in sports, as I think Paul has probably experienced many times, is athletes are looked up to, and sadly in our society, there aren't that many professions that are looked up to as they used to be, and that's regrettable. But athletes still are, by and large, and they have a great platform, and there's a real issue there as to whether athletes are or should be role models. There's a famous Charles Barkley quote, I'm ain't no damn role model, I'm a basketball player. And yeah, I kind of understand that sentiment, but that said, I think that the whole vision of John Paul II and what we try to do when we have our athletes go out and speak and share their faith is to put them in a position to be role models. If I can share a quick story, The best answer I've ever heard, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, by the way, to that question, are you a role model or should you be a role model? But the best answer I've ever heard comes from the former World Series MVP of the St. Louis Cardinals in 2006, their shortstop, David Eckstein. And David was asked this question, and he pondered it, and then he said, you know, I shouldn't be a role model. A role model, you know, especially for young boys and girls, should be somebody who says good morning to them in the morning and says good night and tucks them in the evening. But because I have a position of prominence and people see me on the field and on TV, young people look up to me. So I always try to do the best I can to keep that in mind. And I think that's a pretty good answer. But there's such a tremendous opportunity, and we are so thankful. I am so thankful that people like Paul to come here today and be with us and share his story and his faith. And former national Craig Stammen, who I know credits much of his pitching success to Paul, is you know, one of the athletes who's gone out far and wide to share his faith for us. And when Craig walks into a room, you know, I've seen it here in Washington and now in San Diego where he is, the face of the kids just light up, and it's just, you know, look at them, autograph a baseball, say a kind word. It's like giving them $1 million. It's such a gift. And to live a good, authentic Christian life like Craig and David and Paul, it's a wonderful witness, and one we're very thankful for.
I do want to remind our audience there that there is a question and answer period at the end of this webinar. So at the bottom of your screen, be sure to use the question and answer box, and we'll get to as many questions as possible towards the end. Now, right before we move on to the next question, I did show this particular slide up here where I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is Bishop Michael Burbidge of the Diocese of Arlington, who happens to be the bishop of my diocese where I live in Northern Virginia. Now, he is from Philadelphia, and I'm very glad to see that while I'm sure he maybe grew up a Phillies fan, that he is a Nats fan. So at least it appears that way.
Well, he is also my bishop, and he's a board member of Catholic Athletes for Christ, and I consider him a friend. And he's a great sports fan. He umpires. He at least he used to. He liked to go out and umpire baseball games. And he is a diehard Philadelphia Eagles fan. In fact, I was at a religious event, an Episcopal event, I should say, where Bishop Burbidge was introduced. This is while he was in Philadelphia as an auxiliary bishop, and the introducing person said that Bishop Burbidge has two passions in life: the Catholic Church and the Philadelphia Eagles, and not necessarily in that order. But when he came to Washington, he assures us that he has converted baseball-wise and now is an ardent Washington Nationals fan. So, and that was, by the way, pitcher Anibal Sanchez of one of Paul's guys, who was pictured with the bishop in that last photo.
Fantastic. All right, now, Paul, I read that you have a particular devotion to St. Monica. And for those in our audience not aware, St. Monica was the mother of St. Augustine and is the model and patroness of Christian mothers. Now, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI wrote about her importance in 2009 and referenced in that particular writing St. John Paul II's apostolic exhortation, Familiaris Consortio. This writing focused on the importance of faith in the family, and fittingly, today is the memorial of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of the Church, on the liturgical calendar. Can you tell us why St. Monica is important to you and how important your faith was in your marriage and in raising your kids?
It was my understanding from, as I told you earlier, that my dad was probably a notch below Pope in our eyes, my family's eyes. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, so a year prior to when I got the call to become the big league pitching coach, we lost both my mom and dad. I shouldn't say lost because I know exactly where they are. They are the reason for the success of not only me, but my whole family. And what I mean by success is it brought my brothers and sisters so close through their death, through their funerals, through getting together. Not that we were that far apart, but we weren't as close as we could have been. But throughout the process, starting May 3rd to this day, there isn't a day where all of us are not at some point texting via a very large thread. And during the season, there could be up to not much more, but pretty doggone close to 100 texts a day. 3 brothers and 3 sisters. We lost our oldest sister when she was 18. So it's something that we've had to deal with throughout most of our lives, is death, and the ability to know that there's life after death, and that there's certain influences that play a major part in successes. So my dad, I know I got around to my original point, informed me at the time, because he would be my confidant when it came to religious questions, because he was so much way better read than I was, is what I'm trying to say. So he informed me that St. Monica was, as you said, but also was the patron saint of patience, or patroness saint of patience. So I continue to this day pray to her every night for patience. And in my line of work, or in anybody's line of work, having patience is a key to being successful and to allow others to learn. So I was fortunate enough after my playing career to go back to school and get my degree, and it was in physical education. I knew I wanted to teach in some capacity, and coaching and teaching go hand in hand. So having patience is a huge deal. And if you don't have it, then the frustrations that come about by not having it can only deter you from doing your job, and definitely deter those individuals who are trying to get better an opportunity to do so as well. So the love that I have for my mom and dad has only exponentially grown since they've passed, because of how they've brought my brothers and sisters back to me closer and more contact on a daily basis. And it's gotten to the point now where we're sharing pictures of the meals we're making, and it's become a nice little inner competition to see who's the better cook. And right now, I got to say, my brother Dave is probably winning, even though everybody's giving it their best shot. But we're having fun with it, and it's amazing that something so catastrophic could turn into something so beautiful. And so the relationships have grown. Now, how I tie that into what has happened with baseball, I was walking my dog, getting ready to do something with the minor leagues, when I got the call from a dear friend and my immediate boss at the time, Doug Harris, who's currently going through his 4th bout with leukemia and has had another bone marrow transplant and is doing quite well. He calls me and tells me that I'm going to be the big league pitching coach. And I remember talking to my dog, Gracie, at the time, saying, I don't know what God has in store for us, but I'm looking forward to the challenge. And little did I know at that time that it was all going to work out the way it did. But in the back of my mind, I think I really did, because I knew my mom and dad were watching over us. So what happened from that point forward was the closeness, the texts, the relationships got stronger, and we all had something to look forward to on a daily basis, and that was the game of baseball. And throughout that whole process, we were really down early at 19-31. And during that time, there could have been a lot of negativity. There could have been a lot of people writing us off. But the one motto that we held on to, and I would often say it because they were doing most of the bickering and the complaining, and my answer to them, quite simply, without getting into much detail, was, we'll be fine. And at some point, I think one of my sisters, Sue, is going to write a book, and it might be titled "We'll Be Fine," because of all of the things that occurred during that time. And we were fine. And you know what? In any aspect of life, not just baseball, we'll be fine through this COVID scenario, situation, whatever you want to call it. We'll be fine. And if you have that attitude, and I tie that in with St. Monica, if you don't mind, I know it's a weird way to tie it in, but how else can you do it? Have patience and we'll be fine.
Yeah, that's definitely beautiful. Thank you so much for that answer. You can tell it's very heartfelt. And yeah, it is a difficult time for all of us for certain. And that is just definitely some words of inspiration. Now, I was very fortunate that I got to attend several of the Nats games last season and was actually at Game 5 of the World Series. I mentioned to you over email that I think that Game 5 out of all the home games was actually probably the best baseball game, even though the score did not reflect the outcome we wanted, but ultimately the Game 7 did. But the Nats fans during the run, they seemed to rally around that 19-31 record that you had mentioned. That was the start of the season, 19 wins, 31 losses. And there seemed to be a lot of fans that had concern about the bullpen and how successful they were, or unsuccessful, depending on your perspective. Now, you became pitching coach 30 games into the season. How did your faith give you strength really to wrap your head around all that was going on and how to flip the script, so to say?
It was pretty easy. When you're dealing with professional athletes, there's I think a misnomer that they're spoiled rotten brats and they don't need help and they don't need love. But you know what? That's exactly what they do need, both help and love. And so that's what I promised them when I first sat down with them and had a meeting. I told them that no matter what's going on here, I'm not here to try to take over or change the world. I'm here to make myself available to you. And the only thing I ask in return is that you make yourself available to me. And we'll get through this together. And that was the beginning of a what I call a trusting relationship. Like, wow, this guy might have a chance to help us. So it wasn't overnight that this happened, but I would not miss a bullpen session. I would not miss a stretch unless Ray kept me for some reason. But other than that, I was out there on time every day, just like they were, and they were held accountable if they weren't. And I think it got to the point where they felt absolutely awful if they were late for whatever reason. And the family started to develop and the wins started to come. And the love and the togetherness. I know there's a lot of people saying, oh, the camaraderie issue is a non-factor, that has nothing to do with winning baseball. Good teams are made, but with good talent. Yeah, we had good talent, but we weren't the best team that won all those games. But I want to say this, we were the closest team.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that answer. That was great and very inspiring for all, especially during these difficult times. Just a quick mention that the Nationals Park was also used also for Papal Mass itself. Pope Benedict XVI, on his visit to Washington, D.C., was able to celebrate Mass, and I was very privileged to be on the team that was able to turn a baseball park into a Catholic church, and it was a very great experience. And I'm sure that the Holy Father was blessed to be able to walk through the stadium and see the place itself as it was made up as a church, and also to have, I believe we had about 40,000 participants at the Mass itself. So now we'll go on to the question and answer session, and I will turn it over to Ken for questions and answers.
All right. Just before we get into the questions and answers, I just always wanted to point out this photo. This photo just is amazing to me because, you know, Ryan Zimmerman has been like the face of the Nationals for its entire iteration. And so just to sort of see his locker a little bit different of a setup, not just the uniforms, but here you got the, some of the vestments getting ready for the Mass. And of course, Pope Benedict riding around over here and celebrating Mass on the field is just pretty amazing itself. Okay, but as Brandon mentioned, we are going to be getting into the questions and answers here. So we do have quite a few questions and a couple more minutes left here. We'll get through as many of them as possible. Paul, Ray, feel free to jump in and answer as needed. First question here, was it difficult to have humility when you won the World Series? And if so, how did you try to overcome that?
I'll tell you what, I get accused by some people as being a little bit overconfident and sometimes cocky, I guess is a word I definitely had when I was playing. But either you have it or you don't. Humility is something that I think you can develop, but if you know the reason why you won, and if you look deep enough into your hearts, you realize that there is a lot more that goes into it than just yourself. And if you think it was all you that did it, then you're barking up the wrong tree. There's so many people, like I said earlier, that I have to thank. Our analytics, our video people, John Toskis, Greg Ferguson, our advanced guy, and Jim Cuthbert, Ray, and the priests, and Mike Rizzo. It's a combination of so many people, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention my wife, Bitsy, and our 3 kids, Allison, Jamie, and Michael, to have them with me towards the end and throughout the summer on occasion too, to share in this joy, this gift that I was given to be a major league pitching coach. It's easy to stay humble when you surround yourself by good people.
Very good. Allison's a great name. That's my daughter's name. And it's just a little funny thing here for our audience before we went live.
How do you spell it though? How do you spell it though? Because she spells it with 1 L and an I. And
she's got 2 L's and an I. But just, that's okay.
Acceptable.
But for our audience out there, I forgot that I was mic'd up and I was telling my Allison to be quiet before we started the webinar.
That was fun.
All right. So, Paul, how did your Catholic faith help you when you were working a regular job, per se, according to the question here, in deciding whether to go back to work as baseball as a coach?
I'll tell you what, it was tested. The faith has always been tested. I think we always are tested. We're tempted by that demon himself on a daily basis, and I can't say that I've been successful every day of my life, that's for sure, but I'm getting better. I think that's what we strive for, is to get better every day and try to fight some of these temptations and beat them. It's pretty difficult with the big league atmosphere that is around there. There's an awful lot of trouble that you can get into, but it's definitely getting easier the older I get to handle.
This is a good question for Ray here. How does one get involved in sports ministry? This person's a practicing Catholic and an avid baseball fan.
Good question. It's in my case, a long journey that started actually working with an evangelical Protestant organization called Baseball Chapel. And I think everybody's journey is a little bit different. For me, baseball and baseball first, because I grew up loving baseball, playing baseball, and then sharing the gospel came much later in life. But I developed a great passion and joy for that also. So to have an opportunity to put both together is very special. I'm not sure it's something one plans. Hopefully, as an organization and personally, we follow the direction of the Holy Spirit, as John Paul II always did. My advice for anybody who wants a role in sports ministry is just to pray, and the Lord will direct him or her in the proper direction. I truly believe that.
All right, we got a couple of questions here regarding Mass and also prayer life. So let me start with this one. What is your prayer life like during the season, and are there any go-to prayers that you have?
I have a number of go-to prayers that I say on a daily basis. The number one draft pick would be the Our Father, of course, and then second round would be the Hail Mary. And in our particular job, Saint Michael the Archangel is a must. Just to name a few, those are a constant daily prayer. I've been given many prayer cards throughout the year that I'll read. I'm not as proficient in doing that on a daily basis, but I'll read them and take them to heart as often as I can.
Now, I'm not going to ask you which team name, but are there any particular teams where you pray the St. Michael prayer a little bit harder when you're getting ready to play?
Oh no, they're all the same. They're all the same. We pray for that strength to beat any opponent.
Very good. Let me see. Where was some other questions here? What are some of your? Well, let me get to that one in a little bit.
I saw a good one on there that I'd like to answer. It was what was my confirmation name, and it was Peter. I thought you talk about humility and being humble. What stuck with me and why I picked that it seems like ages ago, was he opted to be crucified upside down, which was way more painful than just the regular crucifixion, which is painful enough as it is. I don't know if anybody's been through that, but I'll tell you what, watching the Passion of the Christ and seeing what Pope John Paul II, I believe, said when he was asked about that particular portrayal was, "It is as it was." And I believe that's accurate. And for Peter to go ahead and get crucified upside down was the ultimate sign of humility and respect and love.
Very nice. Did you have a confirmation saint in particular, Ray?
My confirmation saint is Thomas, St. Thomas the Apostle.
Very nice. All right, now Ray, this might be a good one for you, and Paul as well. We have two questions that are regarding Mass. So when you play on Saturday and Sundays, do you have a traveling priest with the team so you can have Mass? And does every Major League Baseball team have a Catholic chaplain?
Do you want me to take that one, Paul?
I'll say that I was able to go to all the places last year when I was on the road, and I was able to attend Mass at the stadium. But Ray had told me, and he can go ahead and add to it, that I believe there's only 2 teams in Major League Baseball that did not have a regular priest. Am I wrong in saying that, Ray?
No, that's correct. Each team has at least one priest. In Washington, for example, we have a trio of excellent priests, Monsignor Rossetti, Father Fisher, and Father Connors, who rotate masses, and that's usually the case in most stadiums. I do not believe there are any teams, it's very different in the NFL, by the way, but there are any team chaplains who actually travel with the team that I'm aware of, except like on maybe once in a blue moon.
Random factoid, Father Fisher used to be my spiritual director and has a connection with Brandon as well. Paul, are you unique is it unique in the MLB, or are there many others like you that have strong faith that doesn't get overshadowed by all the hype of being in the major leagues?
Uniqueness is what people make it out to be. It's your faith, and if you share it, you share it. I recommend that you do without being extremely pushy and whatnot. I don't deal with the naysayers, and I know I've been into some friendly discussions that have turned into be quite ugly at times when asked about certain aspects of the Catholic faith, and you just realize that they don't. So I invite them to come to church and see for themselves. It's one of those things where it's really not worth the fight to lose a friendship over. And so I usually would turn the page and just invite them. It was like, come make your decision for yourself, instead of just hearing things that are so negative about our faith. There's a reason why it's the largest denomination in the world. So you might want to step on board.
Now, have you ever had a hard time making it to Mass during the season?
Oh, there are times. Yeah, it's difficult for sure. But like I said earlier, that Ray has made it extremely easy with all the work that he's done and his people surrounding him, to where it is, you can't get more convenient than the masses that he provides and sets up for us. And the priests, I can't thank them enough for taking time out of their day to make special trips to the ballpark and allow us to take part in the sacraments. It's so wonderful.
Now, I imagine you have some pregame rituals that you do as a team, but as far as the Catholics on the team, do you have any pregame prayer rituals?
I don't do anything except during the national anthem. I have my own little prayer time. I do that personally. That's my ritual. There are some individuals I know that will, after stretch prior to the game, go ahead and kneel down right there on the foul line and do a devotional out loud prayer circle. And I think it's wonderful. It's mainly the Latin kids, and I'm pretty sure that faith-based group of individuals is primarily Catholic. So it's neat to see them do that. And if I spoke better Spanish, I wouldn't mind jumping in that circle. Maybe I should learn a little Spanish so I can get some extra love. Maybe this year, if we ever play.
And if I could just, Ken, if I could just jump in there. Paul might not even be aware of this, but Monsignor Rossetti, one of our Nationals chaplains, comes by every year at the beginning of the season and does a blessing of the bats. So as a pitching coach, Paul may not even like that, but
I don't mind our bats. No, our bats are fine. He can go ahead and bless ours all he wants. I'll take all the runs we can get.
Well, on that note, a good friend of mine, Tom Zaversal, actually asked a question here. He says, Paul and Ray, thanks for joining us and reminding us Catholic men that faith is infused in all aspects of life. How have your prayer lives changed with the news of the DH coming to the NL? And as a follow-up, what does this change for the preparation of the bullpen as a pitching coach?
Well, we've actually had an opportunity to, have to prepare ourselves when we play interleague games against the American League in American League ballparks. So it's just an extra player. It's not going to be a drastic change in our preparation, but where it's going to make a huge difference is taking the bats out of our own pitchers' hands and preparing them in that regard. So that's going to be something different for them that they don't have to put in their personal schedule, is to get those repetitions in the batting cage or on the field to make sure that they're able to handle themselves when they have to step up to the plate and get that bunt down or move that runner or whatever is asked of them. So that would be the biggest change in preparation. It would be more on them on the offensive side than us preparing to face an extra hitter, a better hitter, I should say.
Gotcha. We have a baseball-related question here. What are some of the bigger challenges in working with younger pitchers in the lower level minor leagues, such as recent high school graduates?
Explain that again. I'm not really sure exactly what they want to know, because I've dealt with the minor leagues for a long time. I'll handle it this way. The minor league players in general are future big leaguers, and the only thing that's holding them back is consistency, because they were drafted for a reason, because a scout thought that they could pitch in the big leagues. And depending on the round, people put value on certain skill sets. So, but to be honest with you, anybody that's been given a uniform has an opportunity to become a major leaguer. And once they've figured out who they are and are able to develop some sort of consistency in getting people out, they have a legitimate shot at becoming a big leaguer. And once they've made themselves available for that opportunity, that's all that stands in front of them, is that circumstance and opportunity. So high schoolers seem to take a little bit longer because they haven't reached their potential in regards to their physical strength but once that occurs, it happens rather quickly. And it was really enjoyable. I never thought I would be the big league pitching coach. I always thought that I would be the guy that got or aided these kids in getting and achieving that goal of becoming a big league pitcher. And that was what fueled me, was watching a kid make his debut. And that phone call or text to that individual was payment enough for me at the time. And I was often scolded that you should have bigger goals in your life than to worry about this. You should want to be a big league pitching coach. And I was like, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I want to see kids get better. And I've taken that attitude at each level coming through the ranks. And I still have it. I want to get these big leaguers better in any way that I can. And that's who I am. That's what I am.
Now, our faith tells us a lot about forgiveness. And of course, we have sacrament of confession. That's always a big thing. But one of the questions that we have here, and we should wrap it up very soon, but one of the final questions we'll take is, I'm sure that there are some teams who have maybe not played fairly against the Nats. Is it easy to forgive them?
What did they do? There's no proof, is there? I'll tell you what, the things that came out prior to the series, and there's no room for cheating in general in any aspect of life. So to try to gain an advantage is a slippery slope, a fine line. And if they were doing that, we were going to do our very best to try to deter them from being successful. So we came up with a plan collectively to counteract anything that they may or may not have been doing. And so we felt very confident going into any series, and not just with the World Series opponent, but with all of our opponents, because it's happening. And I can say with a very straight face that we did nothing in that regard that was illegal. And I feel confident that Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez would also echo that as well. And if other teams were doing it, we were going to do our part not to allow that to affect us.
All right, Ray, we had a question here. Are the families of players allowed to go to Mass that are organized by Catholic Athletes for Christ?
Not only are they allowed, but they're encouraged if they can. I know we have a perfect example here because Paul many times brings his family with him, which we always enjoy, to Mass. And really used to like it when former Nationals closer Mark Melanson, his wife would bring their 3 or 4 little ones, really little ones. And it really changed the dynamic, I thought, for the better. But to have these little kids running around at a Mass with baseball players. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, since you're talking here, is another question for you. What advice would you share with someone who is beginning their seminary or divinity school journey with who one day aspires to create their own sports ministry?
Again, I would say to, stay devoted in prayer, listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit to guide you. I think that's a very noble ambition. There are many, many opportunities. There needs to be much more in the way of sports ministry. We're barely scratching the surface. So we need all the participation and the volunteers. And we have by the way, I want to thank, we have an incredible group, Paul mentioned them before, but not only here in Washington, but around the league, of a dedicated, really wonderful baseball Catholic chaplains, priests, who do a great job and really very much care for the souls and the well-being of their teams in a real earnest way. So we're very humbled and very thankful for them.
Excellent. All right. Well, we just have a few more minutes left, so let's do a quick rapid fire questions here. There should be hopefully quick, short answers. So Paul and Ray, are either of you members of the Knights of Columbus?
I am.
Almost.
All right. Well, we are doing some online exemplifications. I'm sure Brandon would be happy to talk to you about those.
Yeah, we'll be happy there to get you all set up, Paul, since you're at home for the moment.
Okay. But hopefully not home for too much longer, right?
I'm it's a work in progress. Let's just say that.
All right. So speaking of work in progress, the question was here is about the 162 games. Do you think there's too many, or should we cut it? Is it about right?
Oh, it's fine. I don't like to mess with history. I think it's perfect.
All right. Do you ever feel alienated by others in Major League Baseball for expressing your faith?
No, just a silly little spats here or there, but they're few and far between.
And how often does faith come up in the dugout or the bullpen? Is it a pretty open conversation?
I think it comes up more often than people think, and I think wrongly too. I think people ask the good Lord for success instead of strength, and that's the biggest problem we have with lack of faith, I guess is the best way to put it. They ask for help in the wrong way, personally. And so how often, this is supposed to be rapid fire. I'm not rapiding firing, am I?
That's all right. We only got one more question left, so we're good.
But I'm just saying that's it's kind of a pet peeve of mine to hear people and see people openly do things, and I sometimes wonder if they're doing it for the right way.
Okay. All right. Well, we only have one more question left. I'm going to let Brandon go ahead and ask that one.
Uh-oh.
Sure. So the final question is, okay, so Paul, I'll ask you the quick fire one. Any flavored sunflower seeds is your favorite? What flavor sunflower seeds is your favorite?
I like the barbecue.
All right.
Barbecue, yes.
You can't do wrong with the original, though. But
That's
as long
right.
As it's not ranch. Ranch is no-go.
And the last one would be, having you inspired any members of the Nationals to consider becoming Catholic, and what was that experience like?
Well, I wish I could take credit for something like that, and it's still, as I said earlier, it's a work in progress. There's some Catholics that don't attend some of these masses that I press often to try to get there, and I'm gonna be a little bit better and more successful in coercing them, making it their idea, so to speak, to get to mass, because it's important that we offer up that hour a week.
Very good. All right. Well, that is the end of our webinar here. I do want to share quickly about our next webinar that's going to be coming up on June 19th, and it's called A Curatorial Exploration of the Knights of Columbus and St. John Paul II. It's co-sponsored by the Knights of Columbus Museum. We'll be exploring some of the different artifacts that are at the St. John Paul II National Shrine that technically belong to the Knights of Columbus Museum and are on loan to us. But thank you again, Paul Menhart of the Washington Nationals and Ray McKenna of Catholic Athletes for Christ, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you've enjoyed this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. While the shrine is currently closed because of the coronavirus impact, we are planning several future online events to help bring the shrine to you. Please be sure to visit our website and follow us on social media, including YouTube, to learn about upcoming virtual events, view exclusive content, stream Mass online, as well as prayer at the hour of mercy. And thank you again for joining us. God bless you, stay safe, and be well. Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Paul.
Your pleasure.
Thank you.
No problem. It's been an awesome time.
That was super. Thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem.
Thank
Our
you,
pleasure.
Paul.